It began with an ordinary assignment. Room 209. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a post-stroke patient under observation. But sometimes, the extraordinary hides in the most overlooked corners, and for Sarah Collins, a nurse with 15 years of experience at Mercy General Hospital in downtown Chicago, that small whiteboard marker outside room 209 would change her forever. Sarah arrived for her shift just after dawn, wiping sleep from her eyes and brushing snowflakes off her coat. Chicago winters were unforgiving, and this one had been particularly cruel. The hospital lobby buzzed with early admissions and half-awake staff. She reached the nurses' station, picked up the day's roster, and scanned the names. Room 209, Ibrahim Karim. She paused. Beside his name was a small red asterisk. Special care required. Religious accommodations noted. She'd seen this kind of note before. It usually meant the patient might request a Bible or want to face east during certain hours, or ask for clergy. It wasn't unusual in a city as diverse as Chicago. Still, something about the name, Kareem, and the note piqued her curiosity. Sarah tucked the clipboard under her arm and made her rounds, room 209 being the last on her list. She stepped in expecting what most long-term nurses expect: an older man, grumpy from discomfort, polite but distant. What she found instead was a stillness she couldn't name. The room was quiet, not hospital quiet, but peaceful quiet. The man lay in bed, alert, his back slightly propped up by pillows. His beard was white and carefully trimmed. His eyes, though slightly sunken from age, carried a calm, no, a dignity that struck her. The TV was off. There were no flowers, no get-well-soon cards. Just a plastic jug of water, a folded brown towel on the table, and a small prayer mat at the foot of the bed. She greeted him with her usual line. "Good morning, Mr. Kareem. I'm Sarah, and I'll be your nurse today." He looked up slowly and smiled. A warm, kind smile. The kind that made you feel like you were a guest, not a caretaker. "Peace be upon you," he said softly, with a gentle nod. It threw her off for a second. Not the words, but the tone. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't just polite. It was sincere. "You too," she replied awkwardly, unsure of the proper response. Over the next hour, she went through the usual motions, checked his vitals, asked routine questions, adjusted his IV. He spoke little, but never in irritation. He answered everything with clarity and grace. He thanked her each time, as if every gesture, even checking his blood pressure, was a favor. It was later in the afternoon when she saw it for the first time. She came in to deliver his medication and found him sitting upright in his bed, eyes closed, hands raised in what looked like supplication. His lips moved quietly, in words she couldn't understand. Arabic, perhaps. The small brown towel was draped over his lap, and the plastic jug of water now rested on the side table, its cap neatly closed. Sarah stood frozen at the door for a moment. She didn't want to interrupt. There was something sacred in the scene. Something she didn't quite understand, but didn't want to disturb. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he simply smiled again and nodded. "Almost done," he said, as if she had walked in on someone finishing a heartfelt letter. Later, she asked the head nurse, a tall Nigerian woman named Grace, "Does Mr. Kareem pray every day?" "5 times," Grace answered, without looking up from her paperwork, like clockwork. "He does his ablution in the sink, uses that towel and water jug. Quiet man, never complains." "Ablution?" Sarah asked. "Wudu." It's how Muslims wash before prayer. Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing the information. It wasn't judgment she felt. It wasn't discomfort either. It was curiosity, a kind she hadn't felt in years. Over the next few days, she observed more. Mr. Karim never asked for anything unnecessary. He never raised his voice, never pressed the call button unless he truly needed help. And each time she brought in food, he'd pause for a moment before eating, whispering something softly under his breath. A prayer, she guessed. He was deliberate with his actions, measured, intentional. It was during one snowy evening shift that things began to shift inside Sarah. She'd had a long, draining day. One patient had passed away unexpectedly. Another cursed at her over morphine dosage. Her son hadn't replied to her texts, and her ex-husband had left a voicemail saying he needed a favor. She felt depleted, empty. At 8:10 p.m., she walked past room 209 on her way to the break room. The door was slightly ajar. She peeked in, not intending to stay. What she saw made her stop cold. Mr. Karim, in his hospital gown, sat facing east. His prayer mat was neatly laid on a chair turned toward the window. A small pillow rested where he'd place his forehead, his arms raised, his face glowing under the faint hospital light. He whispered words that sounded like they came from another world. She didn't know why, but she felt tears pricking her eyes. There was no audience, no performance, just a man, worshiping quietly, humbly, with every fiber of his being. Something cracked open inside her that night. That was the moment Sarah began to watch, not with eyes, but with her soul. Sarah Collins hadn't always been distant from faith. As a child, she would kneel beside her grandmother at bedtime, hands folded, whispering thanks and small wishes into the dark. But like many in the fast-forward world of adulthood, the prayers slowly faded, first into hurried mutterings before exams, then into silence altogether. Life got loud, and her heart got tired. By the time she turned 35, faith had become something that happened to other people. She was proud, efficient, and modern. Spirituality was for funerals or Christmas, not for everyday life, certainly not for sterile places like Mercy General. But something about Mr. Karim's stillness clung to her. It wasn't just his rituals, it was the aura that surrounded him, a silent strength, like a tree that doesn't fear the wind because its roots run deep. And over the following days, Sarah noticed herself drawn toward room 209 more than her rounds required. She would peek through the window sometimes, just a moment. Sometimes he'd be reading from a small green-covered book. She recognized the gold Arabic lettering after a quick Google search. The Quran. Sometimes he would simply be sitting, his lips moving silently, as if in conversation with someone unseen. But not once did he seem lonely. It was strange, Sarah thought, how a man with no visitors, no family photos, and barely a heartbeat's worth of movement could seem more alive than everyone else on the floor. One Wednesday morning, she decided to ask. She entered the room with his breakfast: oatmeal, toast, a boiled egg, and herbal tea. The blinds were open, and sunlight streamed across his bed like warm honey. Mr. Karim was already awake, seated peacefully, his Quran in hand. "Do you mind if I ask you something personal?" Sarah said, placing the tray beside him. He looked up and smiled, nodding gently. "Of course, ask anything you like." She hesitated for a second, then asked, Does praying help with the pain?" He looked into her eyes, not just at her, but into her, with the kind of gentleness that made her feel like a child again. "Yes," he said softly, "but not the way most people think." She tilted her head, intrigued. Pain is part of life, Miss Sarah, he continued. But prayer, it doesn't remove the pain. It reminds me I'm not alone in it. That the one who gave me breath is still with me, even when my body fails. There was a pause, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just honest. I've seen many people pray, she said quietly. But you look like you're really talking to someone. I am. Silence again. Sarah bit her lip. What if someone doesn't know how to start again? Like they forgot how to believe? Mr. Karim chuckled lightly, the sound soft and airy like the rustle of leaves. Faith, he said, is not a ladder you climb. It's a door you knock on, and the one behind it is always home. She stood there, absorbing the words, and for a moment, the hospital room didn't feel like a hospital. It felt like a sanctuary. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words echoing through her mind. Faith is a door you knock on, and the one behind it is always home. What did that mean? For her? Could she knock? Would anyone answer? She pulled her old wooden jewelry box from the closet, the one with her grandmother's cross still inside. She hadn't touched it in years. She held it in her hand, not to worship, but to remember. Not to commit, but to consider. For the first time in over a decade, she whispered a prayer. Not to anyone in particular. Just a whisper into the quiet. If you're real, I want to feel that peace too. Back at the hospital the next day, something was different. Mr. Karim was tired, more than usual. His breath was slightly shallow, and the color had faded from his cheeks. His vitals were stable, but Sarah could feel it in her bones, the way seasoned nurses do. His body was growing weary, but his spirit? Still strong? Rough night? She asked, adjusting his IV. A little, he replied. But alhamdulillah, still a gift to wake up. She smiled softly. Is that what you always say? Yes, he said, his voice light. Praise be to God, for breath, for another sunrise. Even if the body aches. Sarah hesitated. You're not afraid of what comes next? He looked out the window, watching snowflakes fall gently past the glass. No, he said. Because I've lived my whole life preparing to meet the one I love. Tears stung her eyes, uninvited. He turned back to her, his eyes kind. Miss Sarah, can I ask you something now? She nodded, unsure why her throat tightened. Have you ever thanked God for your questions? She blinked. My questions? Yes. Questions are gifts. They mean your heart is searching, and a searching heart is a living heart. When that evening, Sarah stood outside room 209 watching him pray again. But this time her eyes weren't just observing, they were yearning. And though her lips didn't move, her heart whispered what she couldn't yet say out loud. I don't understand it yet, but I want what he has.